Now let's go on to some key applications and scenarios for FIRO B and for FIRO Business. These are some sources of ahas, I think, for your clients when you use either FIRO B or FIRO Business in organizational settings. And here's a list of the key applications. These are the ones that we hear most about from our users. Team building and leadership and executive development. I'm sure you're getting ideas already from just looking at Jane Sample's grid of how useful that would be for those two purposes. It can also be used for conflict management. I want to show you an example of that as we get into it. And also, I think that FIRO B basically is really a great way to show applied emotional intelligence for your clients once they understand their scores and what the scores mean. So here's an activity that comes from that book that I mentioned earlier called Participating in Teams by Gino Schnell in the year 2000. I had the pleasure of working on the manuscript for this product with Gino Schnell as he was assembling it and creating it. I must tell you that Gino and I probably drove the editors at CPP crazy when we were putting this together, because as we were assembling the manuscript, we put in a few activities, and CPP editorial staff very rightly came back and said, hey, if you've got activities, you should make this an activity book and not make it sound like a technical resource guide. So we went back through the manuscript and added many more activities, workshop activities into the participating in booklet. This is one of them. And you can see that what happens here, it's called, I hope you can make this out, My Preferences About Working in Teams. If you look at this page from the Participating in Teams booklet, you can see that there is a continuum running across the top of the page that relates to the overall need score. You can see that it runs from 0 to 54. And remember back for a second to Jane Sample, when we looked at her grid. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see her overall need score of 38. We mentioned that that was medium-high for her. So back to this page again, if you were to take that score of 38 and have Jane transpose that onto that continuum, you can see that here's the top of that page. She put an X over the 38 on the continuum. That corresponds with her overall need score. And then the activity consists of Jane going into the material, given that her score was 38. Look in the quadrant from what I'm showing you in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see it's named as central. That is, scores of 28 to 38, suggesting that teams that operating in teams would be central to a person with a score, an overall need score of 38. And the idea is that participants in an activity like this are to read through those bulleted points for the section that corresponds to their score and check off the scores that they think are true and accurate for them. So Jane would go through that bottom left-hand quadrant, checking off things that she thinks pretty well characterize her style of operating. And then we would ask her to take a look at the bullets that are on both sides of her score of 38. In other words, in the cautious section, her scores of 16 to 27, and also look at the interpretive comments in the active section, the scores of 39 to 54. And again, ask them to go through and check off those activities, picking up things that they think would apply to them, and perhaps questioning things that wouldn't apply to them. So you can see that what happens with this activity, two things really. It tries to bring interpretive meaning to Jane. What does her overall need score of 38 suggest about how she likes to operate? It also allows her, in some ways it acts like a verification exercise. That is, allows Jane to take a look and see, gee, you know, I checked off as many or more things in the active section as I did in the central section, certainly in the cautious section. And I'm thinking that, gee, you know, if my score of 38, it might actually, if I were to push this, it's probably closer to 40 or 42, maybe. That is, I think that teams and working in teams, I'm very active in that. And it's a big part of the way I like to work. But you get the sense of how this activity works and how it takes a score from a FIRO grid and translates it into proposals about strength and style. Let's go on to another page. This one is from the FIRO B Interpretive Report for Organization. It's about leadership style. Again, it's Jane's sample. By now, you're maybe becoming familiar with her scores there on her FIRO grid. They're pictured in the upper left-hand portion of the page. And what the page particularly tries to do is to make some proposals about Jane's style of leading others. Remember, there are areas for inclusion, control, and affection. You may remember that for Jane, that there was a tie between inclusion and affection, both with totals of 14. There's a little reference there to a tiebreaker rule that when that happens, that we would likely give the vote to affection. That is, that affection is the need that will most likely shine through to Jane's style of leadership. And you can, above all the others, above inclusion and control. And you can see some interpretive proposals presented for a person that features and emphasizes affection as a way of leading for Jane. So you can kind of see how you can use some of the FIRO B materials for making predictions about a person's leadership style. Here's another source of ahas for clients that have a FIRO experience. I was so glad to see Gino Schnell put this exercise into his Participating in Teams booklet when he did it back in year 2000 originally. It's based on what we would refer to as compatibility theory from Will Schutz. This, in some ways, is the heart and soul of what Schutz was getting at with the notion of FIRO. You may remember, let me just take you back again for a second here to Jane's sample. She had expressed inclusion scores of 7, expressed control scores of 1, and expressed affection scores of 7. So we put those scores in from her FIRO B grid. This is what she would do in the exercise. Then, as you can see the trend going here, she would go back to her FIRO grid and get her wanted scores for inclusion, control, and affection. There they have been added, 7, 9, and 7. You remember that they were all high. And then Jane would simply follow the arrows, and she would transpose her scores, the ones that we've got on the left side of this page, onto a new FIRO grid. And you can see I've taken her wanted scores, Jane's wanted scores for inclusion, control, and affection, and I have placed them into the upper right-hand empty boxes of this new grid. And similarly, I would take her expressed control scores of 7, 1, her expressed inclusion, control, and affection scores of 7, 1, and 7, and transpose them into the bottom right-hand corner of this new grid. And so, in effect, what's happened is we've created a new set of FIRO scores on the right side of this page. And these new scores represent what Will Schutz would refer to as Jane's ideal other. That is, this is the person that Jane would most likely get along famously with. And it's based on compatibility theory, as I said. As you can see, when Jane expresses her inclusion scores at about a level 7, which is high, this is good because this ideal other is comfortable receiving inclusion scores at about that level. And when Jane wants inclusion at about level 7, this is good because that ideal other sends signals that they want to include her at about the level she's comfortable with. Where you really see it is with the control scores. As you may recall, Jane is somewhat uncomfortable when she's got to offer direction and structure and take responsibility and tell people what to do, if you will, as suggested by that express control score of 1. And this is a good thing as far as that ideal other is concerned because they're not comfortable receiving those kinds of signals from others because their wanted control score is low at about level 1. Remember that Jane really appreciates receiving direction from others with a wanted control score of 9. And this is good because, again, that ideal other sends those signals at about that level. So you can see, without going through the whole thing, how compatibility theory helps Jane predict who is she going to get along with and who will she clash with. I think, as I said, that this is one of the reasons that Schutz put the FIRO instrument together in the first place. It's often missed in FIRO activities, and I was so glad to see Gino Schnell putting it into his participating booklet. It's a real source of ahas, will be a source of ahas for your clients. And speaking of ahas, here is what Schutz would say to the question, as far as FIRO is concerned, is there an ideal way to be? And Schutz was very big on this. He said, yes, it's all about honesty, about knowing yourself, and being aware of the frequency and the intensity of those need areas for inclusion, control, and affection. And he says the next thing that's associated with that is that you need to be mindful and considerate of others. And here's a question that he said is underused in our relationships with others. We tend not to find out or even to directly ask, what do you need and how can I help you get what you need in your work with me? So that's a real aha. And here's the inclusion, control, and affection ahas, according to Schutz. As you can see, it's all about balance, about having enough interaction to avoid isolation, but not too much so as to avoid entanglement. That third bullet is all about inclusion, or as FIRO business would call it, involvement. The second last bullet is about the control area. Have enough influence to determine your own future, but know when to lean on others and let them take the lead and show you the way. So, as he would say, for those folks with high expressed influence, that they need to let others lead occasionally. And the final bullet is about that affection and connection area. Have enough closeness without getting smothered, but not so little closeness that your relationships are impersonal and distant. So you can see Schutz's message about FIRO is it's all about balance. I wanted to show you a page from the FIRO business. And here now we're going to switch from Jane's sample over to John's sample. Perhaps see that in the upper right-hand corner of the page that I'm showing you from the FIRO business profile. And here you can see this particular graph features John's sample's wanted needs. And you can see that of the, remember, the FIRO business refers to the scales as involvement, influence, and connection. And you can see that for John, his wanted involvement, wanted influence are high, and his wanted connection is low. And some interpretive proposals are presented there. And again, you can see it's about really about applied emotional intelligence. Again, remember, I think you'll perhaps get some ahas of your own if you download those sample reports from the CPP website at www.cpp.com.